We do not understand God's reckoning of time, but we also have been shut out from understanding the feast of the Lord, which the New Testament says are all shadow pictures of good things to come.
The Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, presented by Michael Rood.
Shalom. This is Michael Rood at Ophel Gardens on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. It was upon this mountain that the Feast of Hanukkah was initiated a little more than 160 years before the birth of the Messiah. We are going to consider the significance of Hanukkah and what it means to the followers of the Messiah now and in the future. One of the most successful advertising campaigns in the history of Christian marketing has swept the English-speaking world with 4 letters and a question mark. The 4 letters, WWJD. What would Jesus do? In my experience, I have found that few who wear that popular slogan on t-shirts, jewelry, and ball caps actually open the scriptures to find out what Jesus would do. WWJD has become a catchphrase for popular Christian situation ethics. We ask, what would Jesus do? And then attempt to imagine what he would do if he were in our situation. If we genuinely want to know what Messiah Yeshua would do, don't you think that it is best to study what he did? In the book of Luke, it records that Yeshua's custom was to go into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and read the Torah and the prophets. In the Gospel of John, we see that Yeshua went up to Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah, also known as the Feast of Lights. He proclaimed that he was the light of the world, the literal fulfillment of the Feast of Hanukkah. His mother Miriam actually conceived on the last day of the Feast of Lights, and Yeshua was born 9 months later in a sukkah or manger on the first day of the Feast of Sukkot. Hanukkah and Christmas both occur at the same time of the year. Hanukkah falls on Kislev 25 on the biblical calendar, and Christmas occurs on December 25th on the pagan calendar. When Hanukkah originated, Kislev 25 and December 25th transpired on the same day, as it occasionally does. But if we ask WWJD, why do few that wear the slogan recognize that Yeshua kept the feast of Hanukkah rather than celebrate Christmas? He had a choice, and so do you. Join us in the Lester Summerall Television Studios, where this multimedia presentation on The Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord was recorded by the Prophecy Club. This is Bible Prophecy 201. Now, episode 21 in the 26-part series on The Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, Hanukkah, Deliverance from Pagan Sun God Worship.
Kislev 25 is the beginning of the Feast of Hanukkah. Hanukkah in Hebrew means dedication. This is the Feast of Hanukkah, and at first you might say that the Feast of Hanukkah, also called the Feast of Lights, is something we don't read in Leviticus. Is this not just a Jewish feast, whereas all the other feasts are feasts of the Lord that we have been speaking of? And at first you might think that way. But then, as we see in the Gospel of John, in the 10th chapter, it says that it was wintertime. And it was the Feast of Hanukkah, dedications, and Yeshua went up to the feast. Whenever it uses the terminology to go up or he went up to the feast, it is a legal terminology that was specified right in the Torah that 3 times a year you must go up. And you must go up to Jerusalem. Not any place else, you go up to Jerusalem. Not Mount Gerizim, not to your own religious establishment, wherever it may be, but you go up to Jerusalem. Why up to Jerusalem? Because it is at Jerusalem that all of these feasts will be fulfilled. And the Feast of Hanukkah started out this way. It was 168 BC in which Antiochus Epiphanes, a Greek general, came in and conquered Jerusalem, and he occupied the city of Jerusalem and the surrounding area with the Grecian army. When he did that, he went up on the Temple Mount, and he then slaughtered a sow, and he sacrificed it and roasted it on the brazen altar, defiling the altar. And then he set up a statue of Zeus, the Greek sun god, in the temple and proclaimed Zeus to be God. Zeus, the Greek sun god, and he did it on Zeus's birthday, December 25th. That year it also happened to be Kislev 25. Now, this doesn't even sound strange at all to the Jewish nation, because we know that when we were in Egypt, that Ra, the Egyptian sun god, his birthday was December 25th. Tammuz, the Babylonian sun god, December 25th. And Greek sun god, December 25th. And Mithra, the Roman sun god, December 25th. So we all know that these things really came out of Babylon, the worship of Nimrod and Babylonian sun god worship, and then through the Tower of Babel, then they were spread throughout that part of the world. And so it's not anything that's out of the ordinary for us to understand these things. So Greek sun god, Zeus, born on December 25th, that was Kislev 25 that year. Now what happened is that Judah Maccabees and his brethren, against insurmountable odds, overthrew the Greek occupational armies, overthrew the Greeks, and it was Kislev 25, exactly 3 years later to the very day, that they then got up on the Temple Mount. They broke down that altar which had been defiled by the Greeks, and then they broke down the statue of Zeus in the temple, went into the holy place, and when 1 day's supply of kosher oil, they then resupplied the menorah in the temple. They lit the menorah. That became the Feast of Dedication, the Feast of Lights, because that 1 day supply of oil, according to tradition, then stayed lit for 8 days. And 8 days is the duration of each one of the feasts. Even the spring feast, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, is 7 days in duration, but during that feast, on the Bikurim, we begin counting to the 50th day, and that takes us to the final fulfillment of the spring feast. That makes it an 8-day feast in its final duration. Also, the Feast of Sukkot is a 7-day feast, and then there is another day added on to the end. It's called the Last Great Day, and that's a high Sabbath as well. 8 is the number of new beginnings. And then Hanukkah is a feast of 8-day duration, and the 8th day, again, is the new beginning. So Hanukkah, the Feast of Lights, when the Messiah went up to it, he said, I am the light of the world. I am the Shamash, the light that lights every man that comes into the world. He literally is the fulfillment of this feast in the positive. But there are also other shadow pictures embedded in this that you will see that Antiochus Epiphanes is a picture of the anti-Messiah, the Antichrist in the last days, and you'll see how that fits. So each year, December 25th, which is the date of the child mass and the child sacrifice and the worship of the pagan sun gods, that's what it's been throughout all history. And then to have Hanukkah fall at the same time. Why? Because they are literally intertwined with each other, because it's the same event. Every year, Hanukkah is a celebration of deliverance from pagan sun god worship. It lasts for 8 days, and when you participate in the Feast of Rededication, and you rededicate your life to strip yourself from all of the filthy garments of pagan sun god worship, and the tree, the decoration of the penis of Ra with the gold and silver testicles, which has become very popular in America with the Christmas tree, and putting gold and silver balls on it. This is something that goes back thousands and thousands of years before the birth of Messiah. And when you strip yourself of all of the paganism, and you follow the Messiah and rededicate your life, that Feast of Hanukkah is a most precious celebration. And we're going to see that it is a shadow picture of good things yet to come. Now, what's the next feast in line after the Feast of Dedication? We come to Purim, the Feast of Purim. Now, we remember that the Feast of Purim, where that developed, first of all, it was Haman who, in the land of Babylon, he hated that the Jews were keeping the commandments of God. And he wanted to kill them all. And he had just an innate hatred for them. Everyone who kept the commandments of God, he wanted to kill them. And so he worked out a situation with the king there, in which what he did is he cast pur, or lots. In casting these lots, it fell upon this day, nearly a year later, in which there would be a day set aside in which he would destroy, he would kill all those who keep the commandments of God. Now, what Haman didn't realize at the time, but is very significant, is that the number one Jewish person in the Chaldean Empire who was keeping the commandments of God was the bride of the king. It was Hadassah, Esther. She was the bride of the king. She kept the commandments of God. And it was when it came to her attention by Mordecai what the plan was, that Haman, which is a picture of the Antichrist, was setting out, and on this one day he was just going to destroy all those who keep the commandments of God, and he was going to destroy, in effect, the bride of the king, that Esther risked her life. She risked everything, and she got herself ready, she got herself prepared, and went before the king himself and said, if this man, if this Haman just was going to kill me, I would not have spoken up. But seeing that he wants to kill all those who keep the commandments of God, all the Jews, I have to stand up, and I have to take a stand, and I have to speak out. And we see that what happened in the end is that everything that Haman had planned for his enemy, Mordecai, actually came back on him, and we see that very testimony in the Torah. It says that we are not to bear false witness. No bearing false witness against a brother, against a neighbor. And if there is one who bears false witness, then you are to take that man, the accuser, and the accused, and bring them before the judges that shall be in those days. And the judges are to make diligent inquiry to find out the truth in the matter. And if it turns out that this man has borne false witness, and what is a false witness? It is when you give a witness about which you have no first-hand knowledge. That is a false witness. It's a false testimony. In a court of law, it doesn't stand. It doesn't matter that your neighbor told you about this car accident and what happened. If you did not see it, you are a false witness. You cannot bear testimony against that situation. And so anyone who doesn't have first-hand information, who bears false witness, and they do it, and the whole idea is that they are trying to break down somebody else, destroy their life, destroy their ministry, to get on somebody else's back, to exalt themselves, then everything that that person had determined against the man of whom they are accusing is to be done to him. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for life. And that it says the judges are not to spare. And if it would cost the accused their life, then you are to kill the false accuser. That is what is to be done. And that's exactly what happened to Haman. God's Torah, he will fulfill. His instructions he will fulfill. That is why it is so dangerous what is going on among the Christian church. And what I hear going on all the time is the accuser of the brethren, working behind the scenes. One brother accusing another brother, not having first-hand information, but sowing seeds of hatred and discontent, trying to destroy other people's lives so that they themselves are exalted. What's going to happen is the same thing that happened to Haman. Now, these things are very important because now at the Feast of Purim, each year, how do we celebrate this? How do we remember this? Like at Hanukkah, we light lights. Every day for 8 days we light lights, and it reminds us that Shamash, which is the light that lights every other one of those lights, that is the Messiah. He lights every light that comes into the world. And we see that 8 days we light those eight candles in the window, using the Shamash, that ninth candle, and it is looking back at that miracle that has happened, but we also recognize that the Messiah is the light of the world. And so each year Hanukkah is just a treasured time for that 8 days because the light grows brighter each day. And on the last day, that is the day that the angel Gabriel came to Miriam and announced that she would bear the light of the world, the Messiah. And that is the day that she conceived, and exactly 280 days later to the very day, and we've worked it out according to the astronomical detail of the sighting of the new moon down to hundreds of percent of illumination, and we know that exactly 280 days that year is Tishri 15, the Feast of Tabernacles, when the Word is made flesh and tabernacled among us. All of these things with the intermediate and final fulfillments is just a beautiful picture. Now, when we come to Haman, what do we do at each Purim? We write Haman's name on the bottom of our shoe. And when we get together and read the scroll of Hadassah, of Esther, every time we come to Haman's name, what do? We stomp our feet, we scuff our feet, we stomp Haman's name into the ground, we boo, we hiss, we rattle our noisemakers. It is a celebration overcoming Haman and blotting his name out. And how it would be done in the understanding here in the Western world is like writing, the title Antichrist, because that's a title, it's not a name, but writing Antichrist, writing Haman on the bottom of our shoe and booing, hissing, and realizing that if we take our stand, that God is going to deliver us. No matter what happens in this world, He is going to deliver us. Now, in the book of Daniel, it speaks of, in the 8th chapter, the 2,300 evenings and mornings of Daniel 8, the 1,290 days of Daniel 12, the 1,260 days of Daniel 7, Daniel 12, and Revelation 12, the 1,335 days of Daniel 12. What all seem to be indecipherable mathematical calculations to the Western Gentile mind are in fact precise fulfillments of each one of the feasts of the Lord. And they are fulfillments that will go down to the very day, the very hour, the exact moment, in every detail, including the feast of Hanukkah, which has a shadow of Antiochus Epiphanes as the Antichrist, and Purim, which is a picture of Haman as the Antichrist. Now we know that Daniel had all of the information that we now have in his book, and with all the calculations that he had, all the numbers that he had, that what he set about to do was to decipher these things and to determine what the fulfillment of these things would be. And as the book of Daniel indicates, that Daniel was working on these things day and night. Now, and he is a responsible man. He is the president of Babylon underneath Darius the Mede at this particular time. Now, Daniel, who's been given all this revelation, is working day and night. For 2 weeks, he is poring over all these calculations. And then finally, he's making himself sick. He's becoming physically ill because he can't work it out. Now, he's in charge of all the Chaldean astronomers for 60 years. He is the wisest man in the entire empire, and he's one of the wealthiest in the entire empire. He's been given direct revelation by the angel Gabriel in so many instances, and now he is working himself into a frenzy and getting ill because he can't figure these things out. And so then God sends the angel Gabriel down to him, and the angel said, "Daniel, get a life. You are not going to understand these things. They are sealed up until the time of the end. You are going to be dead and in the grave before these things transpire. Now just let it go." And he finally let it go. Why could Daniel not know these things? Because the Feast of Purim and the Feast of Hanukkah had not even been put in place at that time. And the Messiah had not interpreted these things and given the prophetic significance to them until we come to the Gospels. We see that he speaks in Matthew 24 concerning the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel. It is at that time, it is at the time of Purim, that he is speaking these things, exposing the Antichrist, the one who is the desolator, who causes the abomination that makes desolate, and he's speaking about that at the time of Purim. We see that he goes up to the Feast of Hanukkah, and he says that I am the light of the world. And he is the one that is going to overcome the beast, the false prophet, Satan, Antichrist. He is the one that is going to light the world again, and it is the 8th day, the new beginning, in which we see these things take place. So tonight we're going to see how these things fit together in God's reckoning of time in the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And to now, at the end of these days, Daniel said, well, he wrote because the angel told him that these things are sealed up into the last days. Knowledge will increase. Men will run to and fro about the earth, and knowledge is increased not just for the unbelievers, it has increased for us as well. The ability that we have now, in fact, what we're looking at on our screens is run on a computer that has more computing power than what NASA used to put a man on the moon. And what we could not run on a Cray supercomputer 15 years ago, we can sit on the back of a Greyhound bus with a laptop and compute down to thousandths of % of illumination the moon and what it looked like from Jerusalem on April 17th of 454 BC at 8:05 p.m. in the evening, with such accuracy that it couldn't even be imagined a couple of generations ago. But this is what is available to us today. So when I detail some of these things concerning the calendar and the number of days between things, it took us years of working on these things to be able to produce that data in which we know how long individual months are going to be, how long individual years are going to be to our best calculations according to our astronomical and agricultural expectations. But yet God's reckoning of time does not allow anyone to know the day and the hour of the fulfillment of these things. We can only know the times and the seasons. And if we're ignorant of God's reckoning of time and we don't know the seasons or the Moedim, then we are just like the rest of the world, in which they will be crying out for peace and safety, but sudden destruction will come upon them in the day of the Lord, because the day or the millennium of the Lord will come upon them and they will have no idea. It'll be like the days of Noah, in which they were marrying and giving in marriage and everything looked like it was just going on fine, and then all of a sudden when the hammer dropped, it was too late, because they had not made any preparation. Those of the world hadn't made preparation, but Noah had made preparation. And his heart was right. He kept the commandments of God, and he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Grace is not a license to sin, as we saw, but grace is the empowerment to live a holy and a righteous and a godly life in the midst of a dark and a sick and a perverse world. And that is certainly the world in which we live. It was a year and a half ago that I wrote, Y2K is moot. It is totally irrelevant. December 31st at midnight of 1999 does not begin a day. It doesn't begin a week, a month, a year. It has absolutely nothing to do with God's prophetic time calendar. The only thing it could possibly be is a 2-digit computer code problem. But on God's reckoning of time, it has no significance, because it is not using God's reckoning of time. I said Y2K is moot. The day of the Lord is at hand. I didn't say that preparations for Y2K were moot. I said Y2K was moot. It is irrelevant. The day of the Lord is at hand. We have been very careful to be obedient to bringing back God's reckoning of time according to everything that we read and everything that we understand and what we're led into. And even if we go against the flow of what is the modern Jewish calendar or the calendar that the Christians have been using for quite a while, these things have not been a concern. Our concern has been to restore God's reckoning of time, because we left it 2,000 years ago and we are trying to go back to it. And so there is relearning that has to be done, and it takes obedience every step of the way.
Michael Rood will return with some closing thoughts in just a moment.
We are living in God's universe. The world in which we live is synchronized according to God's calendar and God's time clock. The Creator's original reckoning of time was communicated to Adam and passed on through Noah's son Shem to his great-great-grandson Abraham. But a group of exiled Pharisees developed the modern Jewish calendar early in the 4th century of the Common Era. For nearly 1,600 years, the biblical calendar has been in disarray. But since Jerusalem was reclaimed in 1967, there has been a movement to reestablish the original biblical calendar and to accurately calculate the year from creation. In 1998, I published the first astronomically corrected biblical Hebrew calendar with the assistance of biblical astronomer Robert Scott Wadsworth. At that time, we calculated September 11th, 1999 as the beginning of the seventh or Sabbath millennium, the year 6001 from creation. But there was one more calculation that I needed, and it came from the Samaritans on Mount Gerizim and the Karaites in Jerusalem. When the calendar was recalculated, we finally arrived at sundown, March 26, 2001, as the date for the beginning of the month of the Aviv, the first month in the year 6001. According to our best calculations, that moment began the seventh millennium, the day or millennium of the Lord. These dates were derived by calculation, not by revelation. I always qualified our calculations with the phrase, if we are correct, without implying any divine authority to make a definitive date-setting statement. However, that very week, a large group of Ashkenazi and Sephardic rabbis met at the Western Wall and declared that the time of Jacob's trouble has now begun. We later learned that the Masonic calendar also indicated the year as 6001 AL. Coincidence? The Creator still runs the universe on His calendar and His time clock. We invite you to join us again next time for episode 22 in the 26-part series on the prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, and He, the Messiah, shall confirm the covenant. This is Michael Rood from Jerusalem bidding you shalom, peace, and I'll see you when the smoke clears.